Hey y'all, welcome in or welcome back to a new video. Today we're talking budgeting and I'm kind of excited about it because I've been on YouTube for about 4 years now, almost. And every few months I get comments about people asking for a budgeting video. I get comments here on YouTube, but also DMs on Instagram, and I've never made a video. And that's kind of been intentional because budgeting is such a personal thing. Not only is there a lot to talk about when creating a budget and, kind of little things to know, but it's also very nuanced because how you might prioritize your budget really depends on your needs and your goals. Some folks are going to be paying down debt, some folks are going to be prioritizing savings, and there's just like a lot of variables. It's just really hard to say this is the way to budget because that's just not true. There are many ways to successfully budget and many ways to successfully pay down debt or save. While all of this is true, I do still think it's helpful to see how somebody budgets, to see somebody put it together in action. And so that's what we're going to do today. So this video is most likely going to be part of a two-part series. In this video, we're going to talk about basically how to set up a budget and what you might want to consider when doing that. And then part two, we're going to be talking about sticking to a budget and iterating and why you might have trouble or why you might have had trouble in the past sticking to a budget. It's kind of more like application, if you will. I can make more content if you want to do a question and answer about budgets, but all of those other videos are going to be dependent on this one. Despite getting DMs and questions, doesn't mean that everybody wants to see this kind of content. So if it does all right, then we'll make more. If not, we'll just keep it to one video. So in this video, I'm going to first walk you through some things you're going to need in order to set up a budget at all. Then I'm going to walk you through creating a budget. And then throughout that, we're going to stop and talk about some information that would apply to that section. Like when we go talk about debt, we're going to talk a little bit about minimum payments and things like that. And savings, kind of similar thing. So we're going to get started. And I just do want to make it abundantly clear. I'm just one person with one opinion. This is not the only way or the ultimate way of putting out a budget. This is just a way. And this video is meant more than anything to give you something to consider when putting together your budget. Hopefully you'll find things you agree and disagree with me with, and then you can, tweak and make something that is perfect or ideal for your life. So to get started, you're going to need some information. Number one is your income, and you're going to need to know how much you make both in a year and in a month. So you can take your income from your previous month, if that was a normal month for you, or you can go and look in your previous tax statements. Tax documents have either come out or are coming out depending on where you live and your job. I've already received mine for 2023. So you can take a look at those and you can see your income and also your net income after tax or your post-tax income, because that's what we really want to know. We want to know how much money do you actually have to play with each month. If you're somebody who does not have a predictable or stable income, like you're a freelancer or you work for yourself and there are variables to your income, what I would suggest doing would be to look at your tax documents for the previous year to see your total earnings and then create an average from that. So divide your total earnings by number of months, and that will give you an average to work from. You're also going to need to either get physical statements or have access / log into anywhere that you have debts or loans. So credit card debt, car payments, car debt, your mortgage, anything like that. I would also suggest pulling up your bank account and your credit card account, wherever you have credit cards, because you can glean information from there that we can use for specific purposes. But also, you're probably going to need that to look up transactions and things like that. We'll talk more about how we can use that later on, but just have those informations ready. Also, if you pay your rent or utilities at a specific website, it might be helpful to pull up that as well, because to come up with numbers for utilities and to create an average, the easiest way would probably be through such a website if it exists. All right, the last step is going to relate to your expenses. And this is the most extensive pre-work that you would do depending on your knowledge of your expenses. If you at present aren't able to estimate how much you spend on things like takeout, food, entertainment, beauty, clothing, those kinds of more flexible categories, if this is not knowledge that you have offhand, I would highly recommend doing an audit, or alternatively to track your expenses for a month. So let me kind of break these two options down. Option one, an audit, would be to go to a past month of 2023, a month that was kind of average for you. I personally feel like middle of the year, like May to July, are a lot of people's averages because folks spend a lot of money typically at the end of the year, and they're the best at saving at the beginning of the year. And the middle is kind of more like when things average out. So pull up a month that you find average and go through your bank account or, your credit card accounts and look at how much you're spending. So you can go category by category and say, all right, these are all of my food transactions. These are all of my takeout transactions. These are all of my entertainment transactions, beauty transactions, and, categorize them like that. My credit card, both of my credit cards basically do this for me, or it's pretty close estimation. And so I could click a month and it will break down, estimate how much I spent on gas or food, things like that. It's not perfect. Even, when I go to, somewhere like Walmart, I might put soap on that bill when it's 90% food, right? It's not going to categorize everything perfectly. What we want is an idea to work from. The other more accurate way would be to track your expenses for a month. Your goal would just be to track and not necessarily to decrease anything, because you want an accurate representation of how much you're spending. So every time you make a purchase, you note it down and you write a category. I think I have a template for such a thing. If not, you can create one, paper or something like Excel or Notion, and just keep it super simple to track things for a month, and then you can see your averages. The third option, it's like secret door number 3. If either of those feel like super daunting and you're like, I don't think so, there are ways to find averages for your location. And I'm going to I have 2 in the description. One for food, like average expenditures for food based on different household types for the US and Canada. And these can be helpful for establishing budgets. The last thing we're going to need are pen or pencil and paper. I highly recommend doing your initial rundown on paper. I say this because this is kind of like a scrap paper situation. You're probably going to go reevaluate, tweak, and change numbers, which is what we want. And also number 2, there's just so much good evidence that suggests that we retain information when we pen and paper it opposed to electronically. So grab a scrap piece of paper, grab a notebook, and we're Gucci. So that was the last kind of physical thing that you needed to bring. The last kind of consideration that I think is appropriate to make now are your goals. What would you like your budget to do? Or how would you like your money life to look like? And by that, what are your goals? This would be a great time if you haven't thought about your money goals at the next 1 to 5 years. Great time to do it. But also you can think in kind of more general terms. Are you looking to pay down debt or maximize debt payment? Are you looking to save for, let's say, a house or a trip? Or are you kind of looking more to kind of tighten the screws, if you will, and maintain? All 3 of those goals are going to have separate or different results. And now is the time to think about these things before you go into the money, because let me tell you, if you have a clear goal of like, yeah, I want to save for a house, and you go in to actually create the budget, you get to then say, all right, saving is my priority. Here's how I'm going to allocate money to demonstrate that. And this is also the point where people talk about like, now is the time to create your rules, like, or your plan, like your 50-30-20 is one of the most common, most talked about budgeting strategies. 50% goes to necessities, 30% wants, 20% like savings. I'm overall not a fan of this. If anything, I would prefer 30% savings, 20% wants, but also this doesn't work for so many people. If your costs are over 50%, then it goes out the window. And if you're not truly up and up on your costs, even if you are, you can't magically make them 50%. And so you need to see what your numbers are before you start saying this is how it's going to be. So I think it's more helpful to think about what are my priorities versus I'm going to lay down the law of 50-30-20. All right, we're going to get into budget time, and this is going to be an example budget based off of an average annual salary of a Canadian in 2023, which was just over $63,000. We're going to just assume that's net income after tax. That's how I'm going to treat it today. And we're also going to assume in this scenario, this person has $2,000 in credit card debt. This annual salary broken up monthly is $5,265.08. That's how much money we have to play with every single month. So step number 1 is to divide your annual salary into a monthly one. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through expenses. We're going to go through necessities that are fixed, and then secondarily necessities that are variables. Necessities, and how I view those, are things that you would absolutely need even if you lost your job. Like, let's say you lost your job and you were unemployed for 4 months. There are certain things that you could cut even for a month or two, even if you didn't want to. And there's other things that you wouldn't. There's also categories that you could reduce and, rein in the bootstraps if you had to. And so this is what I would consider a necessity. We're going to go through the fixed first, then flexible. The reason for this is because fixed are way easier to calculate. You typically know these, and it also kind of gives you a little boost as we go through, like, yes, I know some of my numbers, and then we're going to go into some of the less known. Well, let's jump into the budget and all right, it is pen and paper time. So we have our income up at the top, and we are going to go through our fixed expenses that are necessities first. So it might be easier to just write down your categories and then add them up after. So we have rent. We also have something like car insurance. You might have regular insurance too. We'll also put renter insurance. These are all fixed. Your phone would be fixed. And then we have our variables that are also necessities. So we have utilities, gas, food. I would also put like home expenses. Like, in my opinion, something like home would be like cleaning supplies or like toilet paper, maybe like, I don't know, like screws or all of that kind of random hardware stuff that you might need month to month. So rent. So this stuff here, your first section, go into your bills and you'll find them. You'll know. So for this example, we're going to put rent at $2,200, car insurance at $138 for the month, renter's insurance at $20, and phone at $45. My actual renter's insurance is, I believe, $20 a month. Car insurance, $138 is the average for Toronto. Phone, I actually pay a little bit less than this. I think most people might pay like somewhere between like $40 and $60, so $45. Utilities. This section here is where you would either go with averages or one of the exercises that we talked about at the beginning of the video. So utilities, gas. So for this example, I went slightly above averages or in the middle. Food for like a single person should be around $300. So we have a little bit extra. Gas, $200 to $300 is pretty typical. Utilities, this is an average as well. And then home is what we discussed. So all of this together is $3,257. No, 65. Which leaves remaining $2,000. So the rest of our variables, we have $2,000 to play with. Before we get into this, after you have a month under your belt, track your expenses. And whatever kind of final budget that you produce, you're going to have a like predicted or like a budgeted, and then you're going to have an actual category after. And you want to be able to find the difference, because in a month, month to month, the stuff is going to change. Some months you might spend $285. Other months you might spend $350. If your budget is flexible enough, which we will talk about, you can move stuff around. And then over time, hopefully you'll have a better idea as to how much you're actually spending in reality. But even then, very few months are just perfect where you spend the exact amount that you've put down and no flexibility is required. So just know moving forward that flexibility is a really important part of budgeting. All right, this is the point where we're going to be considering debts and savings. I think that you should consider these first, right after your necessities, because this is the stuff that's going to matter to most people. This is the stuff that are going to be priorities. And if you have no debts, you can just, skip to the savings part. Or if you're going to prioritize debts, start here first. I'm also of the opinion that consumer debt should be prioritized over savings. First and foremost, because the debt that you have, consumer debt, the interest rate on that is going to be way higher in most cases than just about any type of savings that you can do. So by putting money into a savings account, you're losing money because you have a higher percentage of interest on debt. Like a high yield savings account, at like best during promotions, the first 3 or 4 months is like 4.5%. I think the highest I've seen so far this year is something like 5%. Average credit cards, like minimum interest rate is like 19%. And actually the average interest rate in the United States is just over 24%. It doesn't make sense to put money into savings getting maximum 5% versus paying 24% interest, even 20% interest. So if it were me and I had debt, I'd go for the debt first. I'd be super aggressive on that, and then I would tackle the savings. Now to talk about minimum payments. If you have multiple sources of debt, you're most likely going to have to pay minimum payments on some of them, and you probably aren't able to do or beyond the minimum payments for every source of debt. So that's fine if that's what you have to do if you're going to tackle one debt source first. However, I do suggest paying off your debt in stages, prioritizing, let's say like one credit card first and then going to the other and paying beyond the minimum payments, because minimum payments are not designed for you, the consumer, in mind. Minimum payments are designed to maximize the amount of interest that you owe that bank. So I'm going to give you an example of $2,000 credit card debt, okay? Your first minimum payment might be something like $10, but beyond that, your minimum payment is going to increase. So you are paying off the interest. It's probably going to be around $40 or something like that. So if you were to pay $50 minimum payment each month on this credit card, which is slightly more than the interest, it will take you approximately 85 months to pay off that $2,000 if your interest rate was 24%, which is the American average. So the total interest you would pay over the course of 85 months is $2,188. This is approximate, by the way. So 48% of your monthly payments for the 85 months would go towards your principal, which is that initial $2,000. 52% would go towards the interest. You would pay more in interest than the initial principal. Also, 85 months is 7 years. Well, just over 7 years. If you were to make that payment, $100 instead of $50, you would pay $600 in interest, and it would take you 27 months to pay that off. So just over 2 years. If you wanted to pay your credit card off, that $2,000 in 1 year, you would make $191 a month payment, and you would be paying $273 in interest, or about 12%. The point I'm trying to make is that if you have debt, to kind of play around with your minimum payments to maximize them, and how aggressive you want to tackle that is, of course, going to be up to you, and also like your income, and there are, of course, nuances to take into account. So I do actually have a really great link in the description for a tool that will help you kind of figure this out. And you plug in your debt, your credit card, the amount on your credit card that you owe. You also have to plug in your interest rate, and then you can play around with the amount that you want to pay, and then also the number of months. So you could put in like, how fast could I pay this off if I spend $200? Or you could say, how much do I have to pay off if I want to pay this off in 6 months? A popular debt payment method is the snowball method, where you start with the smallest debt, like smallest monetary amount, and you incrementally go larger and larger. And the last ones are usually things like student debt, if not mortgage. If you're not really sure what to do, what kind of method to pay off your debt, that is a tried and true practice. And there's actually good evidence to talk about this snowball method, or just the principle of, incremental increases and how that affects motivation. So it's definitely not a bad strategy. Personally, if I was dealing with credit card debt, I would tackle the credit card that has the biggest interest rate first, and then kind of go from there. Ultimately, the best plan for paying down debt is a plan that you can stick to. So whatever that looks like, I think is a great place to start. All right, time to talk savings, and we're going to talk about emergency funds first. I would absolutely recommend every person to have at least one emergency funds. There's two types. There's a short-term one and a long-term one. Short-term would be $1,000 that would cover any kind of expense that would come up that like you just didn't anticipate, that would probably eat into your budget. Things like car repairs. If you've been in an emergency, then you know. Long-term emergencies, or longer term, would be roughly 3 to 6 months of your salary, and this is to cover you in case of unemployment. No matter which one you decide to prioritize, if you don't have either of them, the goal is to just get started. Just, start establishing them. In this example, we're going to be using a 3 to 6 month salary emergency fund. We're going to pretend that this person doesn't have it. To calculate that, you're going to use your bare bones necessities number. So in this case, it's around $3,300 multiply that by 3, and that gets you $9,795. Just about 10,000. So we're going to round it up to $10,000. $10,000 becomes the amount of money that we're going to save up to. I suggest prioritizing this, like if we're thinking about large term savings, like if you're saving for a house or let's say having a child, I would suggest doing this because the moment that you have a child or you buy a house, that is when financial stability is going to be needed most. So, a lot can happen between now and the time that you make those choices or those purchases. And once you have them, it's just extra reason to have that cushion. So my recommendation would be to set up this emergency fund first. Depending on how much you need, you could probably do it between 6 months and 2 years. Again, depending on your specific circumstance. And then from there, continue or start your savings goal. All right, now we're into the debts and savings category. And we've already kind of talked about my philosophy about debt and savings. And if this were real life and I had $2,000 worth of debt, what I would do would be as aggressive as I can, and I would reduce all of that for fun stuff as much as possible. And I would probably pay something like $1,500 towards that debt. But for the sake of this video, we're not going to be that aggressive because I want to show you a kind of a more balanced approach and show you how to manage other categories too, because not everybody is going to be able with their money, but also with like their skills and habits that they've developed to be super aggressive. So for this case, we're going to do $500 for debt. And then for savings, we're going to do $700. In our example, the savings, what this is building up an emergency fund. So that $700 is going to go towards the emergency fund. You could also flip this and do $700 towards the debt, $500 towards the savings. And quite frankly, that is what I would recommend. So you know what? Let's go out and let's actually do that. We'll change this to 700 and this to 500. So altogether, both of this is 1,200. And when you look at like even something like the 50, 30, 20 rule, in this example, 20% is like just over $1,000 and the 30% would be about 1,500. This number is in the middle of both of those. So eventually when you get rid of this debt, if you have the $2,000, which if you're paying $700 towards the debt, you'll be able to pay this off in 3 months. By month 4, you'll have all of this money available that you could put towards savings. And if you were to do $1,200 towards your savings, it will take you less than years, like 8.5 months, roughly, something like that, to make a $10,000 or to save $10,000 at this $1,200 rate. So if you were using some of that 12 months to pay off your debt and then up that 500 towards the full 7,000, it should take you around a year to save up the 10. And so by 1 year, you'll have a full-on emergency fund. So now we are going to move on for like the for fun stuff. So what we have left to play with is $800 in the for fun money. In this category, we are going to have things like subscriptions, gym memberships. We're going to call this like makeup and skincare. We'll just label it as like makeup. We're also going to have beauty treatments. We're going to have fun money. We're going to have, we'll call this like a vacation fund, and then buffer. If I were able to make a recommendation for all of this stuff, would be to have a buffer category. A buffer category, buffer amount is an allotted amount. I recommend somewhere between like $60 and $200, depending on how much you make, for unexpected expenses. So buffers help you absorb the cost of other categories if there are unplanned expenses, or like something comes up, or you make an unplanned purchase. And so a buffer of like $60 to $200 doesn't obviously qualify everything, but I've had instances, as an example personally. I had my kettle break last year. In any of these categories, it also happened really early on in the year, like February, and there was no real room in any of these categories for that type of purchase. Because I do have a home category, mine's around like $25, $23, something like that. And that was used up on things, and I didn't use money in like beauty categories, but I also didn't want to take away from those budgets. So if you have a buffer category, it will help absorb unplanned expenses that aren't major but can still impact a budget. And I highly, highly recommend this. So for this stuff, we also cannot forget takeout. Takeout is a big part of most people's budgets. So I would start with the categories that you're thinking about in terms of like a monthly lens, and also ones that you have experience using in the past. So takeout, if you do an audit of one of your months, you'll know how much you spend on takeout. You can also do a bit of an estimate. So the average, think about your life. What kind of takeout do you get? What's the average price of that? For me, average price of takeout is about $35, and my partner and I like to eat out around 1 to 2 times a week. So if we do 35 times 6, that's $210. That would be a pretty good takeout budget. There's not a lot of like coffee and such happening, so this is one that works for me. Gym membership, around $55. Subscriptions, we're going to do $65. One of the activities that you could do for subscriptions and really learning about what you actually use would be to pause every single subscription that you have. Netflix, Spotify. If you have like games or like editing software, maybe not like, my editing software, I wouldn't cancel like any of my Adobe stuff, but I would cancel like if I have an app on my phone, all of that stuff will expire at different rates, right? Like you might have one monthly membership ending on the 5th, another one on the 21st. One at a time, this stuff will go out, right? Like you'll stop having use of them. And then once it goes out, then you'll know exactly what you spend money on and what's worth spending money. So if your Spotify goes out, you totally forget about it. And then one day, like, 2 months later, you use Spotify and you go, oh shit, I haven't used Spotify in 2 months. I forgot. And now you have ads. That could just be like a lesson to realize, oh yeah, I don't really use Spotify. So paying for premium isn't really something that I want to spend my money on. I think an activity like that is kind of fun and helps you determine what you actually use and what you notice yourself using. Wait, hold on. There's something missing. Yes, we'll do clothes here. Okay, so categories like makeup and skincare, beauty, treatments, and clothes, I think these are best off as sinking funds. A sinking fund is something that like you add money to incrementally. So, as an example, if you want your clothes, let's say you want to spend $1,000 on clothes in a year. $1,000 divided by 12 is $83.33. So this would be a monthly budget of $83.33. I think you could treat clothes this way, but I think a more traditional example would be something like a vacation. But I'll show you how it works in both. So $83.33. It's now February right now. And in January, I didn't spend any money on clothes. So if this was my true budget, I would have a bank account or like a secondary checking account. Probably have a few of these if you want to use multiple sinking funds. You deposit $83.33 into that account. You could do that on the 1st of the month or the 31st, whatever. So if I'm February now and I deposit on the 3rd and I haven't spent any money in January, there's now $166.66 in that account, and that becomes the de facto clothing budget, and you can only pull that amount for clothes out of that account, or whatever balance is in that account is the balance that you can have for that category. So I don't buy anything for February, or let's say I use $25. So we have that 66, right? We take about $25 and now have 141.66. We now add in our 83, was it 33? 33. And at the end of March or beginning of March, this is our budget. And you would add every month, no matter what you spent, 83.33, and whatever money's in that pot is what you have to work with for clothes. For vacation, something like that, that can look similarly. Let's say I want to go on vacation and I think it's going to cost me $2,000 and I want to go in October. That's 10 months away. So I could pay for the whole vacation or some of it. So $2,000 divided by 10 is $200. So I could put $200 as part of my vacation budget. And every month we deposit $200 into that separate checking account at your bank, 200, 400, 600. And you can watch it grow that way. And then you come time to have your vacation and you'll have the $2,000 there. So for this example, we're going to put $100 into this vacation sinking fund because I want to take a trip and I think it's going to cost me about $1,000. I'm going to take it in October. This is our example. So we're going to do it this way. So for makeup and skincare, my pot, this one here, is going to be $500. So that one would be $41.60. Beauty treatments, we're going to do $58. Fun money, we're going to do $100, which would leave, if I did my math correctly, all right, $712. My math is mostly correct. So our budget will be, buffer is $87.07. So when it comes to this category of stuff here, this wants category, I consider all of this stuff wants. Yes, in some ways, like skincare, hair care, like shampoo and conditioner, that kind of stuff, those are needs. But truthfully, if you were in a dire situation and you need to replace a shampoo, you or I could go spend $5 or $6, go get one from our local grocery store and be fine. I've done that in the past when money has been super tight. And you could get that to fit in to probably one of these categories. Anything more than that is not a necessity at that point, and that's a need, and that's why we've kind of built out these categories. How much you spend, this is why we're doing this on pen and paper, to give us time to finagle our numbers. You can start with your most important category, the thing that if you could only spend on one of these extra categories, it'd be this thing. What would you want to spend it on? And then the secondary thing would be coming up with your sinking funds or kind of more yearly budgets broken down into monthly amounts. I think things like beauty and clothes should be done through the sinking account type of way, because if you just want to spend $83.33 on clothes and you don't spend it, or you spend half of it as an example, the temptation could be to spend that money on other things, or you want to put it into savings instead, which is not a bad idea. But then when you have to take it down the road, take it out from your account down the road, it just hurts a lot more. So when you take out this money in smaller increments, it just hurts a lot less, and this money is just out of your account and you just don't think about it. And it also creates less temptation to spend money you don't have, because you can say, all right, $83.33, I'm in February, I have $166 that I could spend. It's so easy to spend more than that if you're playing in your regular bank account. Things like fund money and buffers should be your very last amounts of money that you would put into your account. I personally, like in my personal budget, I don't play with fund money. I play with categories and then a buffer. And you could do it that way. Like instead of having, this is like fund money and buffer is $187. You could choose a slightly bigger number than this, like let's say 100 or 125 to kind of be both of those things, or you can create two. If your budget looks like a hot mess because you're like, all right, you're doing math and you're adjusting and tweaking, that's totally fine. That's exactly how it should look. And this is just a bit of an experiment. You do this budget, and then when you have, in reality, when you transfer this to somewhere like a budgeting app where you have a paper planner and you track your expenses, then you go, all right, this didn't really work this way. My takeout was $250, and I think that's way more of a reasonable number. So now this is going to be $250 instead of $210, right? Where am I going to find that extra $40? Do I take it out of my fund money? Do I combine these two categories? Do I do something with buffer? Do I want to spend less money on clothes and make this near half? This is where you would get into that iteration, as I like to call it. There are other sinking funds that you could consider. Vacation is a really popular one. You could also do something like holiday spending. December is at the end of the month. A lot of people celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah. Maybe you like to spend money on your birthday, or you like to have extra money for a gift for yourself on your birthday. This is where you can create money for that. I hope that this video was helpful in giving you something to think about when creating your budget. This budget here, I know is not reflective of everybody's budget. Some of y'all have childcare in there. Some of y'all have not just childcare, school trips. You're paying for lots of stuff for your kids and your costs are greater. We also only did this on like one income. So your categories are like, there's no way this budget matches up category to category for every single person watching this video. And I hope that you've learned enough or saw enough demonstration to be able to apply what you can to your own life. Let me know if you have any questions about budgeting or application in the comments, because I would love to help if I can. The last step of this would be to transfer this to like your official first budget. And there are lots of methods that you can do. This is just a personal note. I have a budget on Excel and I do not use apps. The main reason for that is the majority of apps out there, in order to use the budgeting app, you have to connect your bank accounts directly with the app. You can get great insight by doing this, and things are really immediate and it kind of automates a lot. However, I will not do that. This is a personal preference of mine. Basically, it comes down to there is no single app out there that is 100% secure. The Canadian Revenue Agency, which is the equivalent to the IRS in the United States, has been hacked before. Like nobody is secure, and I want as little people as possible to have access to my real life banking information. And my information was stolen from me in a hack previously, so I do not give out that information and connect my accounts unless I absolutely have to. And because budgeting does not have to be connected in that way, like I just don't trust apps. Even banking institutions have been hacked. I don't trust apps. I don't trust those apps with my information, and it's not necessary for me to put together and use a budget. So I have used apps in the past that do not require connecting accounts, and I think I've just personally preferred to be able to sit down and enter in accounts on my computer because I don't typically like walk out of the store and put in the information right away anyways. So an Excel budget works fine for me. That was just my little tidbit. If you have a budgeting app that you love, share it with the class. Let us know your favorites. A lot of people love You Need a Budget. That's a really popular one. But share yours. If it's paper, if it's Excel, if you have a template, let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching and hanging out with me today, and I hope to see you again around here soon. Bye.